imagine the noise first. It isn't just loud, it is physical. It vibrates in your chest, rattling your rib cage. You are standing right in the heart of ancient Rome. The sun is beating down on the cobblestones, the heat is rising in waves, and the air is thick. It smells like unwashed bodies, exotic incense, roasting meat, and, well, the metallic tang of blood. The crowds are screaming their lungs out. It is a complete sensory overload.
Right, because it's the ultimate spectacle. This is the Roman triumph.
Exactly. Think of it as the Super Bowl parade, a royal wedding, and a massive military conquest all rolled into one, but with literal life and death stakes. Leading the way at the very front of the procession, you have the conquering general. He's draped in a gold-embroidered toga, his face is painted red to look like the god Jupiter, and he's riding a 4-horse chariot. He is the main character of the universe at that moment.
He's a god on earth. I mean, that is literally the message Rome is sending to the spectators. He has conquered chaos and brought order.
Behind him, you see his victorious army. They're singing bawdy songs, waving their weapons around, totally drunk on victory. Then come the spoils of war carts, piled high with gold, statues of foreign gods, maybe some exotic animals like lions or elephants. It's proof that Rome owns the world. But then your eyes drift to the very back of the line, the absolute end of the procession.
The grand finale, though if you are in that group, it is certainly not a celebration.
No, because who is back there? It isn't the VIPs, it isn't the honored guests. It's a group of men in chains, ragged, beaten, heads down, stumbling along. These are the prisoners of war, the enemy generals and soldiers. And everyone in that screaming crowd knows exactly where these men are going. They aren't going to the banquet. They were being marched straight to the arena.
Right, to the beasts. Or straight to the executioner.
Here, the Epithanacious.
Doomed to die.
Keep that image locked in your mind. The general at the front, soaking up the glory, representing absolute power and success. The doomed men at the back, waiting for death, representing shame and defeat. Because in the text we are diving into today, 1 Corinthians chapter 4, the Apostle Paul looks at the church in Corinth, a group of people who think they are the spiritual elite. And he basically says, look, you guys think you are the general in the chariot. You think you've won. But me, the guy who actually started your church, I'm the guy at the back of the line in chains.
It is a devastating image. It completely flips the script on what leadership, success, and even Christianity itself are supposed to look like. It challenges the very DNA of how we view status.
It really does. So today, we are continuing our series, Theology Brain, chapter by chapter, where we don't just skim the surface of the text. We are doing a deep dive, drilling down through the bedrock. We are tackling 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and our mission is to analyze this chapter through the lens of 3 absolute heavyweight commentaries. We've got the stack of books, we have the notes, and we are ready to unpack why the Corinthian church thought they were kings while their founders were scum.
And scum is a polite translation, as we will see later. It gets much more visceral than that.
It gets incredibly graphic. Now, before we get into the heavy hitting, let's orient you, the listener. Where does chapter 4 sit in this massive letter? Because we have been tracking through chapters 1, 2, and 3, and there's a definite narrative arc happening here.
Right, so this is really the climax of the first major movement of the letter. For the first 3 chapters, Paul has been dealing with one specific cancer-like problem in the church, and that is factions. The church is split. People are basically wearing team jerseys. I follow Paul, I follow Apollos, I follow Peter.
It's celebrity pastor culture, first century style.
Precisely. And up until now, Paul has been using fairly polite, constructive metaphors to try and correct them. He's talked about agriculture I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. He's talked about architecture. I laid the foundation, someone else builds on it. It's abstract. It's somewhat gentle. But here in chapter 4, the gloves come completely off. He brings that whole section to a close, and the tone shifts dramatically.
How so? What changes in the actual texture of the writing?
It gets intensely personal. He moves away from the abstract ideas of wisdom and foolishness and gets into household imagery, legal imagery, and finally he becomes this sarcastic, heartbroken father. He's addressing their arrogance directly. The text says they're puffed up.
Puffed up. The Greek word is physios. It's such a great visual word, like a bellows full of air or a toad puffing at its throat.
Or a balloon ready to pop. They have this over-realized view of their own spiritual status. They think they have already crossed the finish line. And because they think they are so high and mighty, they've started sitting in judgment of Paul. They are reviewing him like he's a contestant on a talent show.
So chapter 4 is Paul's defense, but it's also his counterattack.
We have a clear roadmap for this dive. We are breaking the chapter into 3 distinct movements. First, verses 1 through 5, the steward of the court of judgment. Then verses 6 through 13, the sarcastic comparison, kings versus scum. And finally, verses 14 through 21, the fatherly appeal.
A father holding a rod, which is a scary image that we really need to contextualize later.
We will get to the rod. But first, let's introduce our guys. We aren't doing this alone. We are looking at this text through 3 specific commentaries. Who are we dealing with, and why did we pick them?
We have a fascinating trio today representing the best of modern scholarship. First up, representing the BECNT series, is David E. Garland.
And what is Garland's vibe? If he was a character in a movie or a specific type of professional, who is he? Garland is the detective, the literary analyst. His lens is primarily rhetorical. He is obsessed with the structure of Paul's argument. He looks at how Paul uses things like covert allusion, basically, how Paul says one thing to mean another without naming names. Garland sees the text as a strategic dismantling of Corinthian pride, using the tools of ancient debate. He is cool, collected, and precise. He notices the literary patterns that others might gloss right over.
Okay, so Garland is the rhetorician. Who is next?
Next, we have Gordon D. Fee from the NICNT series. Fee is a theological powerhouse. If Garland is the cool detective, Fee is the passionate prosecutor or the revivalist preacher.
Fee definitely brings the heat.
He absolutely does. He is particularly focused on eschatology, the study of the end times and the work of the Holy Spirit. You can almost feel him getting frustrated with Paul at the Corinthians. His core diagnosis of the problem is over-realized eschatology.
That is a $10 phrase right there. Let's bank that for a second. We will define it clearly when we get to that part of the text.
Deal. But basically, Fee is constantly contrasting a theology of glory with a theology of the cross. He's looking for the big theological drift underlying their bad behavior.
Got it. Fee is the theologian of the cross. And our third guide.
That would be Anthony C. Thiselton from the NIGTC series. Thiselton is the philosopher of the group. He engages deeply with hermeneutics, how we interpret texts, and reception history, which is how the church has read this text over the centuries.
I noticed in the notes he brings up some heavy hitters like Michel Foucault and speech act theory.
He does. Thiselton is very granular. He looks at how words do things, not just describe things. He's interested in the psychological and sociological depths of the text. So we have the rhetorician in Garland, the theologian in Fee, and the philosopher in Thiselton.
That is a killer lineup. Let's jump into the text. We start with verses 1 through 5, the steward and the tribunal. Paul starts by telling them how they should view leaders. He uses 2 very specific words here, hyperetes and oikonomos.
That's right. And the translation really matters here because our modern English words, servant or manager, don't quite capture the grit of the original Greek.
Let's start with hyperetes. What are we looking at visually?
Hyperetes literally means an under-rower.
An under-rower. So we are back to the boat imagery, but very specific.
Exactly. Picture one of those massive ancient warships, the triremes. You've seen them in movies, rows of oars sticking out the sides. Down in the belly of the ship, sweating in the dark, breathing stale air, pulling the oar to the beat of a drum that is a hyperetes.
That is not glamorous at all. It's claustrophobic.
It's a purely subordinate role. You aren't the captain. You aren't navigating. You don't even see where the ship is going. You are just rowing where you are told to row. Garland points out that this word implies a voluntary subordination, but it emphasizes that the under-rower has no authority of their own. They are just the engine. They execute the orders. They don't give them.
That is a far cry from the celebrity pastor image the Corinthians seem to crave. They want a captain. They want a figurehead with charisma. Paul says, no, I am the guy in the basement pulling the oar.
Precisely. And the second word, oikonomos, shifts the metaphor to the household. It means a steward or a household manager. In the Roman world, this was often a slave, but a high-ranking slave.
Like the head butler. Or a property manager type figure.
Sort of, but with much more financial power. They held the keys, they managed the master's affairs, paid the bills, distributed the food to the other servants. But, and this is the crucial point Fee makes, they owned nothing. They were managing someone else's property.
So the leader has status within the house, but absolutely no ownership. It is a position of trust, not possession.
Right. All 3 of our commentators agree that Paul is deliberately shifting metaphors here. We have gone from the field and the building in chapter 3 to the household. And the point is, leaders do not own the church. It isn't their brand. It isn't their personal franchise.
Paul says they are stewards of God's mysteries. Now, when I hear mysteries, I immediately think Agatha Christie. or a riddle that needs solving.
Right, but in the New Testament, mysterion doesn't mean a whodunit. Fee points out that mysteries refers to the gospel revelation, truths that were hidden in the past, in the Old Testament era, but are now revealed by the Spirit. The fact that God would save the world through a crucified Messiah, that is the mystery. The leader's job is just to get that message out faithfully. They are the mailman delivering the letter or the waiter bringing the food from the chef to the table. They didn't cook the meal.
And that leads directly to the job description. Paul says the only requirement for a steward is to be found trustworthy or faithful. Not successful, not eloquent, not innovative, just faithful.
It is a massive relief for anyone in ministry, honestly, but it is also a severe check on the Corinthians. They are judging Paul based on his rhetoric, his stage presence, his wisdom. And Paul says, I don't care about your performance review. My job is faithfulness to the master.
This is where the text gets really interesting with the legal imagery. We enter the courtroom. Paul uses the word anachrono. What is happening there?
Anachrono isn't just generic judging. It technically means a judicial inquiry or a preliminary examination. It is like a pretrial hearing where they gather evidence to see if a case should actually go to court. Fee argues that the Corinthians are essentially conducting a tribunal against Paul.
Wait, literally or metaphorically?
Metaphorically,
Yeah.
but with real-world consequences for his authority. They are hauling him into the court of public opinion, scrutinizing his credentials, putting him on the stand. Is he impressive enough? Does he speak well enough? Is he spiritual enough for us?
And Paul's response is classic. He essentially says, I don't care. Verse 3, it is a trifling thing that I should be judged by you. And then he goes further, I don't even judge myself.
That is a radical statement. I don't even judge myself. This is where Thiselton really shines. He digs into the concept of the conscience. The Greek word is synodesis.
Yeah, Thiselton mentions C.A. Pierce's dial metaphor regarding conscience. This was really helpful for me. Break that down for the listener.
So imagine a dial or a pressure gauge on a complex machine. The gauge tells you if the machine is running hot or cold, right?
Right. It gives you a reading.
But the gauge isn't the machine itself. It is just an indicator. Pierce argues that conscience is just the gauge. It registers your own internal state, but it depends entirely on how it is calibrated. If your conscience is calibrated wrongly, it might tell you you are totally fine when you are actually sinning.
Like a sociopath who feels no guilt. Their gauge is broken. It always reads normal.
Exactly. Or the exact opposite, a highly neurotic person whose gauge is oversensitive and tells them they are guilty when they're actually innocent.
So having a clear conscience doesn't necessarily mean you are innocent before God. It just means your gauge isn't flashing red at the moment.
Exactly. Paul says, my conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. He knows his internal gauge might be off. Garland calls a good conscience a soft pillow, which is a lovely image. It helps you sleep at night. But then he warns it can be a pillow of self-deception.
Thiselton gets really psychological here too, doesn't he? He brings in Tyson's insight about the hidden things of darkness.
Yes, this is fascinating stuff. Usually in church, when we hear hidden things of darkness, we immediately think of secret sins. The money you stole, the affair you are hiding, the lie on your taxes.
The literal skeletons in the closet.
Right. But Thiselton and Thyssen suggest it goes much deeper than that. It includes unconscious motives, things we don't even know about ourselves.
The unconscious. So we're getting Freudian here with the Apostle Paul.
In a way, yes. We cannot fully judge ourselves because we simply don't have access to our own unconscious data. We might think we're doing something for God. I'm leading this ministry for the kingdom, but deep down in the dark basement of our psyche, we might actually be doing it for our own ego, or to please our Father, or for power. We can't see that. We are blind to our own deepest motives.
That is heavy. It means introspection has a hard limit. You can dig and still not hit the bottom of your own motives.
But that is the beauty of it. It is the theological significance of this whole section. It is freedom. Freedom from the tyranny of human opinion, but also freedom from your own opinion. You don't have to paralyze yourself with endless introspection. Am I doing enough? Are my motives pure? Paul says, I leave that entirely to the Lord. He is the only competent judge. He will bring the true light to those hidden motives.
So stop the trial, stop the performance review, stop the navel-gazing, wait for the Lord. That is the message of verses 1 through 5.
Just be a faithful rower and let the captain steer and judge the progress.
Love that. Now we move to verses 6 and 7, which Garland calls the interpretive enigma.
This is famous among scholars. Verse 7 contains a phrase that has baffled translators for centuries. not beyond what is written.
It sounds incredibly cryptic, that you may learn by us not beyond what is written. The grammar in the Greek is all broken, right? It is essentially a sentence fragment.
It is very awkward. It is barely a sentence. Some scholars in the past even suggested it was a scribal error, like a marginal note that a copyist accidentally typed into the main text. But our commentators, Fee, Garland, Thiselton, they all reject that completely. They think it is original, but they have a cage match on what it actually means.
Let's unpack the options. What does Garland, the rhetorician, say?
Garland goes back to Chrysostom, the ancient church father. He argues that Paul is using covert allusion.
Meaning what, exactly?
Basically, Paul has been using himself and Apollos as examples. I planted, Apollos watered. But Garland thinks Paul isn't really talking about himself and Apollos. They aren't the problem. He is using them as safe aliases, as stand-ins for the real troublemakers in Corinth.
So it is like when a teacher scolds the whole class, but is really looking directly at the one kid causing trouble in the back row.
Exactly. It is a way of scolding the faction leaders without shaming them publicly by naming them. Garland thinks what is written refers to the Old Testament scriptures Paul has already cited in chapters 1-3 passages about how human wisdom is foolishness to God. He is saying stick to the Bible, which tells you to be humble.
Okay, that is Garland. Read the Bible, stay humble, stop acting out. What about Fee?
Fee hates the covert allusion idea. He thinks it is too clever by half. He rejects the idea that Paul is using a disguise. He thinks Paul uses himself and Apollos because they are the actual examples. They are the leaders the church is actively fighting over.
So for Fee, it is entirely literal.
Yes. For Fee, what is written specifically refers to the verses Paul cited earlier, like Jeremiah 9.24. Let him who boasts, boast in the Lord. It is a theological command. Don't go beyond Scripture's boundary markers regarding human pride.
And Thiselton, he always adds a philosophical twist to the text.
Thiselton takes a much broader view. He thinks what is written is likely a combination of Scripture, tradition like Christian maxims, and reason. He translates the key verb metaschematiza as elusively applied. He agrees there is a profound lesson here about limits. The Corinthians are going beyond the boundaries of the gospel into arrogance. They are coloring outside the lines of what it means to be a Christian.
And that leads to verse 7, which is just a hammer blow against that arrogance. Paul asks 3 rhetorical questions. Who makes you different from anyone else? What do you have that you did not receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you did not?
This is the death of the meritocracy. Think about ancient Corinth. It was a city of new money, a city of hustlers and social climbers. Status was everything. If you were rich, eloquent, or wise, you boasted about it because you earned it. I pulled myself up on my bootstraps.
The ultimate self-made man.
Right. Paul cuts the legs completely out from under that worldview. He says, no, you didn't make yourself. Everything, your spiritual gifts, your intelligence, your salvation, your very breath is a gift. If it is a gift, you can't brag about it. You can only say thank you. Grace eliminates boasting.
That is a total mic drop moment. What do you have that you did not receive? It is a question that haunts you if you sit with it. But Paul isn't done. He picks the mic back up and starts swinging it. We move into verses 8-13, the sarcastic contrast, or as I like to call it, kings versus scum.
The tone here shifts again. It is just dripping with sarcasm. It is biting. Paul says, already you have all you want. Already you have become rich. You've begun to reign, and that without us.
He is mocking them, right? He doesn't actually think they are rich kings.
Absolutely. He is holding a mirror up to their delusion. But our commentators have different angles on why the Corinthians are acting this way in the first place.
Yeah.
This is where we need to define that term we banked earlier.
Over-realized eschatology, Fee's favorite phrase to throw around. Break it down for us.
Okay. Eschatology is the study of the end times, the future kingdom of God. In Christian theology, there is a tension called the already and not yet. Jesus has come, so the kingdom is already here in part. But he hasn't returned to finish the job, so the fullness is not yet here. We still have suffering, death, and tears.
So we are living in the messy middle.
Right. Fee thinks the Corinthians have collapsed the timeline. They think the not yet is already here. They think they are living in the fullness of the kingdom right now. In the end times, believers rule with Christ, right? We are rich in glory, no more suffering. The Corinthians think we are there. We are kings. We have the Spirit. We speak in tongues. We have unparalleled wisdom. We are ruling.
Please, they skip the suffering part entirely.
They want the crown without the cross. They want dessert before they have even finished their vegetables. So they are acting like spiritual royalty while Paul is out there suffering in the real brutal world.
Garland takes a slightly different road, doesn't he? He brings in the Stoic philosophers.
Yes. Garland notes that in Stoic philosophy, which was huge in Corinth at the time, there was a popular saying, the wise man is king. It wasn't about the end times for them. It was about worldly arrogance. If you were truly wise and self-sufficient, you were a king in your own mind. Garland thinks the Corinthians are just being arrogant in a very standard Greco-Roman way.
And Thiselton, how does he view this sarcastic list?
Thiselton connects this to what are called peristasis catalogs.
I'm sorry, what catalog?
It's a fancy academic term for a list of hardships. In Stoic literature, the true sage proved his worth by how much physical and emotional pain he could endure without breaking. Paul is about to give them a list of his own hardships, but he flips the script on the Stoics. He is not enduring it to show how tough he is. He is enduring it because that is simply what apostleship looks like.
Let's look at the specific imagery in verse 9. This brings us right back to our intro. The theatron, the spectacle.
Both Garland and Fee agree completely here. This is the Roman triumph or the gladiatorial games. Paul says God has put the apostles on display at the very end of the procession. The world is the stadium. The angels and humans are the spectators. And the apostles are the epithanacious.
It is such a visceral contrast. The Corinthians are up in the VIP box, eating grapes, thinking they are untouchable kings, and Paul is down in the sand, bleeding, waiting to die.
And Paul leans hard into it. He gives this list of woes in verses 11 through 13. We go hungry and thirsty. We are in rags. We are brutally treated. We are homeless.
And then he hits them with the absolute lowest insults possible. Verse 13, he calls himself perikatharma and parapsoma.
Scum and refuse.
But the Greek is even more specific and gross, isn't it?
It is. Perikatharma is the filth you clean up, like the grime around the bathtub or the dirty water left over after you scrub the floor. Parapsoma is literally scrapings, what you scrape off the bottom of your sandals after walking through a dirty ancient street.
Ouch, I am the stuff you scrape off your shoe.
Thiselton discusses the scapegoat theory here too, which is fascinating. In some ancient Greek rituals, during a plague or a major crisis, a city would take a person, usually a convicted criminal or someone completely on the margins, and treat them as refuse or a scapegoat. They would sacrifice them or cast them out to physically purify the city.
So Paul might be saying, we are the sacrificial trash that purifies the world. We bear the curse.
Possibly. But Thiselton and Fee agree that, at a bare minimum, it denotes being the lowest of the low, the absolute bottom rung of the social ladder.
And this is the core of the theology of the cross. The messenger has to look like the message. The message is about a crucified criminal who saved the world. So the messenger looks like a criminal suffering, marginalized, and shameful. The Corinthians desperately want a theology of glory, success, honor, wealth, cultural relevance.
That is the clash. You cannot preach a crucified Christ from a throne of gold. The medium has to match the message. If you want to follow Jesus, you have to be willing to be considered scum by the surrounding culture.
Paul doesn't stay in the sarcasm forever, though. In verses 14 through 21, the tone shifts one last time. He stops being the satirist and becomes the father.
This transition is crucial. He says, I am not writing this to shame you, but to warn you as my dear children. The emotion finally breaks through the rhetoric.
He distinguishes between a father and a guardian. What exactly is a pedagogos?
Garland explains this really well. A pedagogos, which is where we get the word pedagogy, wasn't a school teacher in the modern sense. It was usually a household slave who was trusted to walk a child to school, carry their books, and make absolutely sure they behaved. They were often strict, using a stick to keep the kid in line. They were temporary disciplinarians.
So Paul is saying you have 10,000 guardians, maybe referring to Apollos or other newer teachers, but you only have one father.
Right. He begot them through the gospel. He started the spiritual family. A guardian uses force or shame to get compliance. A father uses relationship and admonition. He genuinely loves them.
And because he is their father, he tells them, imitate me. Now, to a modern ear, that sounds incredibly arrogant. Be like me. If my pastor stood up and said, be like me, I would be like, whoa, calm down, narcissist.
It definitely sounds arrogant to us. But Fee points out that this was standard Jewish and Hellenistic pedagogy. You didn't just learn abstract information, you learned a way of life. Mimesis imitation, the rabbi or the philosopher, was the living model. Paul isn't saying, I am morally perfect. He's saying, watch how I live to understand what the gospel actually looks like in practice.
And what does it look like? It looks like the list of hardships he just gave.
Yeah.
Imitate me means be willing to be scum for Jesus.
Exactly. It does not imitate my power and authority. It is imitate my cross-bearing.
Thiselton gets into some heavy modern debates here. He engages with critics like Castelli, who argue that Paul is being authoritarian and manipulative, essentially playing the dad card to exert power over a vulnerable group.
Thiselton vigorously defends Paul against that. He argues that Paul isn't seeking personal power for its own sake. He is seeking consistency with the gospel. He talks about his ways in Christ. He is not asking them to blindly obey him like a tyrant. He is asking them to align with the character of Jesus. If Paul was just power-hungry, he wouldn't be living as a homeless, beaten-up apostle. His very life proves his motive isn't self-serving.
The chapter ends with a threat, though. It is the classic, don't make me pull this car over moment. Shall I come to you with a rod, or in love and a gentle spirit?
The rod connects right back to that pedagogo's image, the disciplined stick. Fee makes a great point here. It is a choice of manner, not motive. Paul loves them either way. But how that love is expressed, whether through gentle hugs or stern corrective discipline, depends entirely on their response. If they stay arrogant, he brings the rod. If they repent, he brings the gentle spirit.
Okay, we have walked through the entire text. Let's do our commentary showdown. We have 3 heavyweights. How did they stack up against each other on the central problem of Corinthian arrogance?
It is fascinating to see them side by side, because they all tackle it differently. Fee handles it theologically. For him, the arrogance is a failure of eschatology. The Corinthians have broken the timeline. They want the not yet right now. They want the glory without the cross. Fee is passionate about this. He sees it as a complete spiritual disaster.
Garland
handles it rhetorically. He sees the arrogance as a trap Paul is springing. Paul uses irony and covert allusion to lure them in, let them agree with him, and then reveal that they are actually acting like spiritual infants. Garland appreciates the craft and strategy of Paul's argument.
And
Thiselton handles it pastorally and philosophically. He sees the arrogance as a massive failure of self-awareness, the whole conscience issue, and a failure to understand how the cross critiques all human status. He brings in the sociological aspect of how groups form identities around power.
What about their tone? How does reading them actually feel?
Fee is almost sermon-like. He gets fired up. There is a quote from Fee, the Corinthians' theological misunderstanding, is they are decidedly anti-Paul. They have already arrived, as it were, but in all the wrong ways. You can just hear the preacher in him.
Garland seems cooler, more analytical from what you said.
Yes. Garland is the keen observer. He says, the self-deceived think that they build with gold, when in fact they build with stubble. He is diagnosing the text like a doctor.
And Thiselton is the encyclopedic sage.
He really is. He writes, Paul leaves his successes and failures with God. Neither other people's verdicts nor one's own self-awareness can penetrate unconscious motives. That is a profound, almost counseling-like insight into human nature.
So if we had to boil this entire deep dive down to one big idea, what is it?
I think it is this. True spiritual maturity is not found in status, rhetorical skill, or a sense of having arrived. It's found in the humble, faithful stewardship of the mysteries of God, modeled entirely after the humiliation of the cross.
That is so good. It redefines success completely. Now let's bridge this to today. Why should a listener in 2026 care about a letter written to Greeks 2,000 years ago?
Because we are the Corinthians. Let's be brutally honest with ourselves.
How so? In what specific ways?
First, look at the trap of success. Connect Fee's over-realized eschatology to the modern church. We are utterly obsessed with winning in culture. We want the influence. We want the political power. We want the celebrity pastors with the massive platforms. We want the crown. We absolutely do not want the cross. We don't want to be scum.
We want to be the general in the chariot, not the captive at the end of the line.
Exactly. And Paul warns us, if you are reigning like kings in a world that crucified your Lord, something is fundamentally wrong with your theology.
There is also a huge application regarding the conscience and judgment. Thiselton's point about the unconscious is so relevant for our age of anxiety.
Oh, it's massive. We live in an era of neurotic introspection. We are constantly curating our image, checking our likes, analyzing our own motives. Am I a good person? Did I do that for the right reason? Did I post that photo to share joy or to get validation? It is paralyzing.
And Paul offers this radical freedom. I do not even judge myself.
It is pure psychological relief. You don't have to be the final judge of your own worth. You literally can't be. You don't have enough data. You can just be faithful in the moment and let God handle the final verdict. That is a huge weight off the shoulders.
Finally, the standard for leadership. We still gravitate toward eloquence and wisdom. We want the TED Talk pastor.
We do. We follow the charismatic speakers, the influencers.
Yeah.
But Paul says, look for faithfulness. And be prepared that faithful ministry might look like being refused to the world. It might look like absolute failure by worldly standards. It might mean a small church, a quiet life, and no book deal. And that might be exactly where God is most pleased.
That is a hard pill to swallow, but a necessary one. Okay, as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a thought. Paul ends the chapter with that choice. Shall I come with a rod, or in love and a gentle spirit?
It's the ultimate question of how we are stewarding what we've been given.
Here's my question for you. If the Apostle Paul showed up at your church or your life today to inspect the stewardship of your life, which would he bring? Would he find a humble steward rowing in the dark or a puffed-up king sitting on a throne?
That is the question we all have to sit with. And I will tease next week, the arrogance we talked about today isn't just theoretical. In Chapter 5, we're going to see that this arrogance has allowed a shocking, specific moral failure incest to fester in the church while they do nothing.
The rubber meets the road next time. Thanks for diving deep with us.
See you then.